Good morning. Today we are going to start the poem Keeping Quiet. Keeping Quiet is written by Pablo Neruda. Pablo Neruda was the pen name and later the legal name of a famous Chilean poet. He was also a diplomat and a politician. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1971. His speciality was that he wrote with green ink, which became his personal symbol for desire and hope. Most of his writings are simple and therefore very beautiful. The present poem Keeping Quiet is a splendid poem which dwells on a quality which seems to have been lost in the buzz of the 21st century. That is, the quality of silence. Keeping quiet is a gentle reminder what life can be like in a brief moment of silence. This message instantly resonates in the digital age where switching off has become a much needed life hack. The theme of quietude and stillness is also accompanied with the themes of peace, pacifism, fellowship, brotherhood, justice, and ecological conservation. To keep quiet is stay still and understand that one is a thread woven with the exquisite fabric of the cosmic order. It is also to identify oneself with all and, in doing so, escape the sadness of never understanding ourselves. To keep quiet is to escape the death with which we threaten ourselves always, and for once and truly live. Now let's begin with the poem. The poem Keeping Quiet is written in a simple yet elegant language. Keeping Quiet is a free verse poem and therefore it does not follow any rhyme scheme. It begins with an appeal to keep quiet and stay still. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. The heart of this poem is inclusivity. The poem seeks to rise above racial and linguistic differences. This attempt towards inclusion is seen in the opening lines of the poem. The speaker employs the collective we to begin the exercise of keeping quiet. The count till 12 may be interpreted as signifying the 12-hour mark of the clock, from which the two hands circle in a monotonous manner, very much like the daily activities of life. For once, on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. Noteworthy is the fact that keeping quiet is as much about staying silent as it is about staying still. That is why the poem advocates for a ceasing of words and actions. Language brings differences. The great number of languages on the face of the earth seem to highlight the ways in which we are different from one another. The use of the words any language tells us that the speaker recognizes the limits of language. He also envisions a state beyond the domain of language itself, that is, silence. Keeping quiet is also about letting our differences dissipate in the silence of our similarities. The moving of arms not only harks back to the ceaseless movement of the hands of the clock, but also to the gestures of restlessness and aggression, which the modern world is obsessed with. Let's move ahead. The poetic devices are already given. You may please go through the PPT to understand it better. It would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. One must remember that Extravagaria, the collection of poems in which keeping quiet was featured, is a later work of Neruda's and it has an overall universal tone. The collection was a product of well-garnered experiences and frequent traveling. This hectic pace of a busy life is what makes silence an exotic moment. Like the clock, our lives have become utterly mechanical, dominated by rush and engines. A moment of silence will not only be delightful and rare, but also a strange one. This is because we have internalized rush to such an extent that silence, though enjoyable, has become unfamiliar to us. It has become rare in the modern world, and therefore, keeping quiet is one powerful way of escaping the mechanistic motion of the modern life. Further, the poet says, fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. In this line, he has a political ideology. Neruda was intensely aware of the exploitative economic structure of the capitalist economy, which has exploited man and animals alike. He also was painfully aware of the historic exploitative colonial practices used by European settlers. And therefore, in this poem, he incorporates all these things. He tells us that man's greed not only leads to the exploitation of other creatures, but also of fellow human beings who are oppressed by the unjust economic system. Neruda strongly sympathized with the working class and very well understood the strong class divisions that had fractured the Chilean society. The sufferings of both the workers in the salt mines and the sea creature in the ocean would end for a moment if only everyone kept quiet. The theme of environmental conservation and social justice makes its presence strongly in this stanza. Now we come to a very important stanza of the poem. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victory with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers, in the shade, doing nothing. What I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. These lines highlight the devastating consequences of war. It seems that all the troubles in the world, right from the plight of the whales to the horrors of war, result from someone's inability to keep quiet. Somebody in some corner of the world takes an unnecessary action, and the fate of everyone else is affected by that. By writing about those who prepare wars, the speaker hints at the manufactured nature of war, which is intended to satisfy specific interest of some parties and devastate the lives of others. The damage done by the conventional, chemical and biological weapons can be stopped only when nations and government teach themselves to keep quiet. Neruda had been a witness to the atrocities committed during the Spanish Civil War. He had seen war from the close quarters and very well knew that what victory with no survivors looked like. Neruda had this to say about the Spanish Civil War actually. If only we could keep quiet, people waging such wars would put on clean clothes, free of the bloodstains and guilt, and would be able to walk hand in hand with the brothers in the shade, in silence and in peace. The poet further makes it clear that what he is advocating shouldn't be confused with total inactivity. For total inactivity means death, and he has nothing to do with death. In his own words, I have no truck with death. This is a very, very important point, as we should not be confused that keeping quiet means death. No, it is not. The poetic devices are in the PPT. Please read and understand the same. Moving ahead, if we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. These are perhaps amongst the most insightful of lines in the poem, where a stark reality of the modern life is highlighted, of being intensely caught up in the web of rush and activity, to the extent of not understanding ourselves. It is the tragedy of the modern world, where people are too busy to live. If everybody kept quiet for a single moment, a huge silence may interrupt the sadness of being too busy to understand ourselves. Our inability to keep quiet results in our failure to understand ourselves and others. The monotonous rush of life makes individuals threaten oneself with death, and their failure to keep quiet make nations threaten one another with wars. Thus, the silence which results from keeping quiet isn't only an exotic one, it is also an introspective one. It is a soothing silence that can heal the self-inflicted wounds of humanity. The poem moves on a very positive note again. Perhaps the earth can teach us, and when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now, I'll count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I'll go. These lines bring to light a very important fact, that mere movement and rush should not be confused with life. The poem ends on a positive note by saying that perhaps we can learn a lot of things from nature. Perhaps this is the mistake we have been committing in our lives. We are thinking that mere movement and rush means life, but it is not. We have confused movement with life. Perhaps this is why we need to keep quiet. This is self-realization, and this may help us appreciate life and understand its meaning. This realization will also remain with us for a long time, letting us fully understand and appreciate what it means to keep quiet. At the end, the speaker says that now once again, I'll count up to 12 and you have to keep quiet and further I'll go. After saying this, he says I'll go. He says so as he has conveyed his message to the people and wants them to be left alone to think about it and work in the direction of peace. This is one of my personal favorites. Please try to understand the poem and understand its meaning. It is really worth. Thank you.